Tonight, and through this video, I want to address all working class individuals in Canada. It does not matter whether your designation is that of employee, where you are working for a corporation, working for someone else to provide your own living, or whether you are the employer, the CEO, the executive, the owner of the corporation. This video and the knowledge contained in this video will affect you directly. It will affect you and your family directly. It is very important that you should have this knowledge. What I am about to release to you is something that the government had the obligation to teach you in the first place, not showing you anything that is hidden. Within the income tax enactment, the government, the state party, is seeking to force you into recognition under a legal designation of an officer of Canada or a servant of Her Majesty through the income tax enactment, and subsequently seeking to declare that you have taxable income through this designation. The mechanism of law that is used in these enactments to infringe on our inalienable rights is to change our designation to that of a legal status, a legal person, a juridical personality. You see it play out in these examples. In the Highway Safety Act, it attempts to remove the designation of man and render me a driver. In the Education Enactment, it attempts to remove my designation of human being and renders you and me a student. In the medical enactments, they attempt to remove my designation of man and designate me a patient. The forestry enactments attempts to remove my designation of human being and render me a fisherman, a hunter, or a pleasure boat operator. So all these enactments, they change my designation, my status, from man or woman into a legal designation, a juridical personality, whether it be driver, student, patient, hunter, or pleasure boat operator. These are all classes of persons under law. So we should expect to see the same mechanism of law within the income tax enactment, and we do. This enactment seeks to change my status, my designation of free human being into an officer of Canada or servant of Her Majesty. The deception starts right away in the enactment with the following statement. So in the income tax enactment, we find the following. Tax payable by persons resident in Canada. An income tax shall be paid as required by this act on the taxable income for each taxation year of every person resident in Canada at any time in the year. So when you don't file, they'll send you a request to file, and they'll say, according to our records, you have taxable income, therefore you need to file. And here they're saying that if you earn an income tax shall be paid for all taxable income for every taxation year. And that's the letter they send you. And they're declaring that you're a person who is resident in Canada. That's why you owe that obligation. Well, two important factors come out here. It's a class of person that owes a taxation, because here it says every person, right? It doesn't say every human being. It doesn't say every man or woman. So it's a class of person they are dealing with. If that class of person is resident in Canada, then and it has to pay income tax on the taxable income. So you see that? Every person resident in Canada. Now, many understand the above verse to mean if a person lives in Canada, then they must pay a tax. They understand this to be saying if you work in the year and live in Canada, then you must pay income tax. Many understand the word resident, they take it to mean lives in Canada. When you look in the income tax enactment, in the interpretation section, you do not find the definition of the word resident. it's left up to you to draw the conclusion based upon your reading of the enactment what they are referring to, what designation of the word resident is being used in the particular articles of law. They give you many interpretations, they give you many definitions of many words in this enactment, but when it comes down to resident, they particularly and on purpose do not describe the word for you. So you come to hear every person resident in Canada, people take it to mean resident in Canada. Oh, if you live in Canada, you are required to pay an income tax. However, what the enactment is actually saying is as follows. Resident, a person who has a residence in a particular place. So when we go a little deeper and we look at the word resident in general, without applying the legal meaning to it, we find that it qualifies it like this. A person who has residence in a particular place. It doesn't talk about living anywhere. It's not talking about living in Canada, living in a home, living in a municipality. It says a person who has a residence in a place. Now, notice that the definition of resident does not mention living. It says a person who has residence in a particular place only. So we go and we look at the meaning of residence. Well, what does residence mean? It means the place where a corporation or other enterprise does business. That's what it's declaring. Just like when a nurse or doctor does their residency at a hospital. The hospital is the residence, right? This is what's transpiring here. This is what's being declared here. Canada, the corporation, the enterprise, is the residence. If you are a resident in Canada, you are a person who has residence in the corporation, does business in the corporation. They make you file under the presumption, under the legal determination, that you have residence in Canada. The class of person who is resident must pay an income tax on taxable income. Now, what type of class of person are we talking about? So far, we have seen that the class of person is part of the Corporation of Canada through its residency. But what person are they talking about? The income tax definition, and that is spelled wrong, but we'll just leave it like that. So the income tax enactment definition, employed. So if you are employed, if you consider yourself to be employed under the income tax enactment, this is what it means. It means that you are performing the duties of an office or employment. So if you say, well, John, I'm employed and I have to pay taxes, what you are declaring under the Income Tax Act is that you are employed, you are performing the duties of an office or employment. And to be employed, again, means performing duties of an office or employment. So what does that mean? Well, an office under the Income Tax Enactment is described as follows. An office means the position of an individual, entitling the individual to a fixed remuneration, and includes a judicial office. So if you work in the judicial office, if you're a judge, a court clerk, and the like, then you are definitely employed in an office. If you are in the office of a minister of the Crown, then you are employed in the office. If you are a member of the State of the House of Commons of Canada, a member of a legislative assembly, or a member of a legislative or executive council, and any other office, the incumbent, of which is elected by popular vote, or is elected or appointed in a representative capacity, and also includes the position of a corporation director. An officer means a person holding such an office. So if you're employed and you say that you are performing duties of an office under this enactment, it means you're working for the government. That's what it means. And further to that, it goes on to say that if you're employed and you're working in the office and you're working for the government, then you're also considered an officer, because an officer means a person holding such an office. If I am employed under the designation of office, then I am also an officer. The meaning of an officer is the one who holds an office. Under the Income Tax Enactment, if I am declared to be employed, then that means I am performing the duties of an office or employment. To be employed under the designation of office refers to the judicial office, the minister of the crown, your elected parliament. These are all declared to be an office and officers. So under this enactment, if you say I'm employed, you're saying that you work in an office. You're performing duties of an office, and therefore you are an officer. And if you are employed, well, then you are working under employment. Now, what does the word employment bring forth in this enactment? So the second way within the income tax enactment that I can be considered employed if I'm not in an office or an officer is through employment. So let's see what employment means. Employment means the position of an individual in the service of some other person, including Her Majesty or a foreign state or sovereign, and servant or employee means a person holding such a position. If I am employed under the income tax enactment, I am in a position of service for some other person, because employment means the position of an individual in the service of some other person. So I am the individual in the service of some other person. Then I am employed. Now, my position of service to this other person is what? Is a servant or employee. That's what it says. Servant or employee means a person holding such a position. So according to the income tax enactment, it is declaring that if I say have employment, it means I am in the service of another person, and the service that I am performing for this other person is I am a servant or an employee. Employment equals position of service. Servant or employee. The servant is the minister of the crown, the office. The servant is all those called by the Governor General into position, including lawyers and judges. They are all classes of persons who have taxable income. The employee in this enactment is described as follows. Employee includes officer. So you see that here. When they use the word includes, they're closing off the word officer. Whatever comes after the word employee, includes, officer, this definition, this description is the only thing that describes the word employee. So when you use the word employee, you are declaring that you are an officer under the income tax enactment. So if you're in employment as an employee, you're declaring that you are an officer. And an officer means what? A person holding such an office. Remember, we read that before. If you are considered an officer, if you are an employee under this enactment, you are considered to be an officer of Canada. Why? Because when they use the word office, they say an officer means a person holding such an office. The only class of person who has taxable income under this enactment is a designation of officer, the one who works for the government. That's the only one. And we're scrolling back up here again for 1 second. So if you're employed, if you're in employment, if you say I have employment, under this enactment, it says you're a servant or an employee. If you're a servant, then you're in the position of the crown. You're serving you're serving the crown, you're serving Her Majesty. And if you're an employee, what does the enactment say that you are? It says that you are an officer. See that? You're an officer. So you're still serving Canada. So again, the only class of person under the Income Tax Act who can be taxed and who has taxable income is an officer. Now, income tax enactment, withholding. How do they hold the tax from the individuals? How do they take away the tax from the individuals? Provision of this act requiring a person to deduct or withhold an amount in respect of taxes from amounts payable to a taxpayer are applicable to Her Majesty in right of Canada or a province, and a province operates in right of Her Majesty. Her Majesty is the only power that has the right to apply a withholding upon salaries, and this would be expected because the ones she is withholding from are all officers of her realm, Canada. We saw the only one who is in operation in this enactment is an officer of Canada, and therefore it's not no surprise that the one who's allowed to withhold the tax from her officers is Her Majesty. Now, withholding, Article 153 of the Income Tax Enactment. In the Income Tax Act, Article 153. So every person paying at any time in a taxation year salary, wages, or other remuneration other than the amounts described in subsection 115 shall deduct or withhold from the payment the amount determined in accordance with the prescribed rules and shall, at the prescribed time, remit the amount to the Receiver General on account of the payee's tax for the year. Now, where, at the prescribed time, the person is a prescribed person, the remittance shall be made to the account of the Receiver General at a designated financial institution. This above article of law states that every person paying a salary. Well, we know that in this enactment, the only employees in this enactment that could receive a salary are officers of Canada, officers of Her Majesty. So the only person paying in this enactment is Her Majesty. Employers pay salaries, and in the income tax enactment, employer is defined as the person who pays the officers. Employer, in relation to an officer, means the person from who the officer receives the officer's salary. Who's that from? Her Majesty. Her Majesty, in right of Canada, through the Governor General, is the person who pays the salary, the remuneration to the officers. This salary is considered taxable income. The enactment states that this person paying salaries, paying remuneration, shall deduct or withhold from the payment a determined amount and give it to the Receiver General. Shouldn't it be Governor General there? Should be Receiver General. However, there is condition placed upon this deduction. The one who is suffering from a deduction of a salary is a prescribed person. See it up here? We're at the time. The person is a prescribed person. Then we'll take the remittance off. So, where at the prescribed time, the person is a prescribed person, then they shall deduct or withhold from the payment the amount determined in accordance with the prescribed rules. And who is the prescribed person in this enactment? What is the class of person we are dealing with in this enactment? It is the officer. The only one that can be deducted from is the officer. The officer is the prescribed person. Since I am not an officer of Canada and subsequently not employed as defined within the enactment, I have no obligation to exercise any privilege associated with the social insurance number and have no taxable income. It is only the officer of Canada that must present or use such a card. Now, when we look to the minister's duties for the CRA, we find the following: powers, duties, and functions of the minister. The powers, duties, and functions of the minister extend to include all matters over which Parliament has jurisdiction, not by law assigned to any department, board, or agency of the Government of Canada, or other than the agency relating to, now watch, D, internal taxes, unless otherwise provided, including income taxes. So the minister has been given the power and the duties concerning internal taxes, income taxes. And when we actually look into the income, this is the CRA income tax enactment. And now when we look actually into the income tax enactment itself, we see what's happening. The only one that's being taxed in this income tax enactment is the officer. It's an internal taxation that's taking place. The income tax that's being paid is officers of Her Majesty that have to pay this, government officials. Now, when you look at the social insurance number, you understand that this is a voluntary application. It's supposed to be voluntary. No man or woman can be forced to sign up or to participate to use a social insurance number. This is why, again, participation in the social insurance program is voluntary. According to the social insurance application form, which is a federal enactment, box 13, where it clearly states participation is voluntary. However, through the income tax enactment now, officers of Canada are forced to subscribe to the program. That class of person, the officer of Canada, must now have a social insurance number. In Article 237, it says every individual who was resident or employed in Canada. And now you know what that means. When they use the terminology resident or employed in Canada, officers of Her Majesty. Those who are working on behalf of Her Majesty for Canada. Within 15 days after the individual is requested by the person to provide his social insurance number, apply to the Canadian Employment Insurance Commission in prescribed form and manner for the assignment to the individual of a social insurance number. So now, where the application itself in the federal enactment says that to have a social insurance number, it's voluntary, the participation is voluntary, the income tax enactment is saying you must, Officer of Canada, apply for the social insurance number. Why? Because through the social insurance number, they're going to do the withholding. They're going to remove from your salary. So they need this number. The federal government has guaranteed the individuals in this country the choice to freely dispose of their natural wealth, their labor, without any obligations, while guaranteeing that those who do will not be deprived of their own means of subsistence. The state party is claiming through the enactment that you are employed, that you are an officer of Canada, and as such they can apply a withholding against you and take income away from you. The only person that may withhold is a prescribed person. That person is an officer of Her Majesty, operating on behalf of Her Majesty, according to the enactment. Their party has breached our fundamental rights and freedoms through this enactment. They have forced many into legal recognition as an officer of Canada, to subsequently declare that they now have what is defined as taxable income under the enactment. Their party then has further attempted to force individuals to contribute to the economic, social, and cultural development of Canada and the provinces through this designation of officer. Whether you work for someone or own your own business with many employees, you are being deceived into withholding and paying amounts. Maybe those around you are honestly in deception, but that does not mean that you should fail to exercise your fundamental rights and freedoms and allow yourself and your corporation to be forced to pay something that you are not obligated to pay. You are not an officer of Canada. You have no accountability to the Income Tax Act of Canada. And if you would understand how to defend yourself properly, you can invoke the administration of justice through the inherent powers of the court and explain what is going on against you. This is a disgusting enactment. This enactment was created by the legislators and probably with the help of the judiciary here in Canada to try and strip individuals of their fundamental right and freedom, of their inalienable right not to have to contribute to society based upon the principle of mutual benefit. So they figured if we can change your classification in law and render you a class of persons, which is that officer, then we can force a contribution from you. But you don't have to take recognition as that officer under law. That is your inalienable right, according to Article 16 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. You do not have to take recognition as a juridical person, as a class of person, so that you can be regulated by their government produced rules and regulations.